A royal feud can survive whispers, but not an ultimatum. In this fictional account, the Queen delivers a demand so severe, it changes the rules overnight. William and Harry must end their public war immediately, or face enforced separation designed to make reconciliation impossible. Not because she's sentimental. Because she believes the crown can't survive another season of humiliation. Tonight we reconstruct the alleged demand, the hidden panic behind it, and why family unity suddenly feels like a threat. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It lands like a sealed directive, the kind of message that isn't meant to be discussed, only obeyed. In this dramatized scenario, it arrives through the strictest channels, carried by the calmest faces, delivered with a tone that pretends this is routine while everyone in the room knows it isn't. The effect is immediate. A private order spreads like shockwaves, not because it's leaked publicly, but because every handler, aide, and courtier can feel the temperature change. Conversations shorten. Schedules tighten. People stop improvising. Because when the Queen speaks like this, she's not asking for harmony. She's announcing consequences. The stakes are no longer personal. That's the first brutal truth. The feud has moved past brotherly pain into institutional damage, and in this fictional account, the palace treats institutional damage like a fire, not with therapy, but with containment. Every headline, every public hint of division, every lingering narrative of two brothers at war is treated as corrosion on the monarchy's most valuable asset, its illusion of unity. And once unity becomes an illusion people mock, the crown becomes just another celebrity storyline. That is the humiliation the Queen allegedly refuses to allow. So the ultimatum is framed as power, not pleading. Compliance or consequences, not please reconcile, but end it now. The palace doesn't present it as a family intervention, it presents it as an emergency command. And that's what makes it terrifying. The brothers are being told to heal on demand, to perform closure on a schedule, to stop the story before it infects the institution further. But forced reconciliation doesn't produce love. It produces resentment. It turns brotherhood into obedience. It turns apology into transaction. And once that happens, the feud doesn't end, it mutates. Because the threat beneath the ultimatum is separation. Not an emotional separation, an operational one. Access, schedules, events, narrative control the machinery of palace life, used to make closeness impossible without ever calling it exile. In this dramatized world, separation means the calendar becomes a weapon. It means the brothers are never placed in the same room unless it's scripted. It means the pathways to spontaneous repair, private conversations, unscheduled contact, the quiet human moments where reconciliation actually happens are cut off. The palace calls it management. The brothers feel it as a wall. And then comes the emotional fracture that makes the whole demand feel like a trap. Because if you force unity, you don't create peace, you create performance. William, in this scenario, is expected to embody stability, to absorb pain and turn it into duty. Harry is expected to quiet his story, to contain his anger, to accept a version of events he may believe is incomplete or unfair. Both are expected to sacrifice something real so the institution can look calm. That's where family unity starts to feel like a threat, because unity isn't being offered as healing, it's being demanded as silence. Which raises the core mystery: who pushed the Queen to act this hard, and what's the real fear? In a palace, severity doesn't appear in a vacuum. Someone has argued that the feud is no longer tolerable. Someone has warned of consequences beyond embarrassment, constitutional risk, public fatigue, donors, Commonwealth perception, the next reign's legitimacy. Someone has presented the feud not as a family pain, but as a strategic vulnerability. And once the Queen accepts that framing, the response becomes colder, faster, more absolute. Then the cliffhanger hits. Insiders whisper the ultimatum included a deadline and a punishment clause. Not just end it, but end it by this date. Not just reconcile, but or else this will happen. A line in writing that transforms a family crisis into a countdown. And the moment a countdown exists, everyone begins calculating what happens when time runs out, because the palace doesn't issue countdowns unless it's prepared to enforce them. But to understand why a queen would threaten separation, we have to decode what public feud really means to the palace, because it isn't drama, it's destabilization. In this dramatized world, the palace doesn't fear emotions, it fears optics that can't be controlled. A public feud isn't just hurt feelings, it's a crack in the myth. And when the myth cracks, power leaks. This section exposes why the institution treats visible division like sabotage, why the Queen's demand isn't about love, and why end it now sounds less like a mother's wish and more like an emergency command to stop a slow collapse. Because the monarchy's unity myth is not decoration, it's infrastructure. It's the invisible scaffolding that holds the entire idea of the crown upright in the public mind. People don't need to understand constitutional details to believe in stability. They just need to feel that the family at the center looks coordinated, disciplined, unbreakable. The moment that image fractures, the monarchy stops looking inevitable. It starts looking negotiable. And negotiable is the one thing a monarchy can't afford to appear. Because once the public tastes optional, loyalty becomes conditional. That's why public conflict invites a feeding frenzy. The press doesn't report division, it magnifies it. Every sideways glance becomes a headline, every absence becomes a statement, every rumor becomes a storyline. Public skepticism grows like mold in the quiet corners. If the family can't manage itself, how can it represent a nation? In this fictional account, the palace doesn't just dread embarrassment. It dreads the erosion of deference. Because deference is what makes the monarchy powerful without needing to prove its power. Lose deference, and every royal move becomes a question instead of a tradition. So the Queen's demand is shaped by risk calculus, not sentiment. What does the palace believe it stands to lose? Authority, credibility, the ability to steer attention away from internal damage and toward public duty. A public feud is a faucet the palace can't turn off, and every drop feeds the idea that the crown is just a family with a logo. That's why end it now sounds like an emergency command. The palace isn't trying to heal two brothers, it's trying to stop a slow collapse of myth. And inside that myth management, factions begin to reveal themselves. Some genuinely want reconciliation because they fear chaos. Others want permanent distance because distance is easier to control than forgiveness. Reconciliation requires truth, and truth is unpredictable. Distance can be arranged with calendars and protocol. Distance can be framed as moving forward. Distance can be sold as dignity. In this dramatized world, the Queen's ultimatum becomes a battleground not only between two brothers, but between two visions of survival unified publicly at all costs, or separate permanently to stop the bleeding. That's where the moral tension becomes unbearable. Unity is demanded at the cost of honesty. Peace is offered only if certain truths stay buried. Because in palace logic, reconciliation isn't always say sorry. Sometimes it's say nothing. Sometimes it's stop talking about the past. Sometimes it's agree to a version of events that keeps the institution clean. And if one brother refuses to accept a sanitized narrative, then reconciliation becomes impossible, not because the heart can't soften, but because the institution won't risk what honesty might reveal. Which is why the ultimatum feels less like a mother's wish and more like a containment operation. The Queen is positioned not as a grandmother begging for family healing, but as a commander protecting the myth. The palace treats visible division like sabotage, because it functions like sabotage whether intentional or not. It undermines the performance the crown relies on. And once performance is undermined, every future era becomes harder to manage. The next reign inherits not just titles, but doubt. Then comes the chilling cliffhanger that rewires the whole story. A palace aide hints the feud is connected to a bigger file. Something off limits. something institutional, something that explains why the Queen's demand is so severe it feels pre-written, as if a protocol has been waiting for exactly this crisis. If there's a bigger file, then the feud isn't just public drama, it's a door threatening to open onto something the palace cannot afford to have examined. And if there's a bigger file, then the feud isn't just a feud, it's leverage. And leverage is why separation becomes a weapon. Separation doesn't need a banishment. In this fictional timeline, it's done through calendars, access, and silence so clean it looks natural. The Queen's demand comes with machinery-controlled invitations, non-overlapping routes, communications filtered through aides, and a slow, elegant distancing that turns two brothers into two separate brands. In this section, we unpack the alleged separation protocol, because once the palace activates it, closeness becomes impossible by design. Because soft exile is the palace's most refined tool. It doesn't announce itself, it arranges itself. Scheduling becomes the first blade events partitioned so the brothers never share the same space long enough to speak privately. Routes planned so they arrive through different doors and leave through different doors. Seating charts that keep them separated by enough bodies, and etiquette that conversation is impossible. Then access control titans who can request a meeting, who can approve it, who can find time for it. The answer is always the same, no one says no directly, but somehow it never happens. Contact throttling follows. Fewer direct calls. More intermediaries. Messages pass through aides like fragile packages, edited by caution, delayed by protocol. What used to be a relationship becomes correspondence, and correspondence is easy to manage. A palace can't control an emotional conversation between brothers, but it can control a calendar entry. It can control who is available. It can control who receives what information and when. And over time, the distance stops feeling temporary and starts feeling normal. That's the psychological poison of separation. The forced distance becomes a permanent habit, and habit becomes identity. Security becomes the perfect pretext, because for safety sounds noble while functioning as control. In this dramatized world, security briefings justify why one brother can't attend a certain gathering, why the other must be moved to a different location, why plans must be adjusted. The palace never says we are keeping you apart, it says we are managing risk, and it lets everyone pretend they believe it, because believing it is easier than admitting the institution is building walls inside a family. The symbolism is the quietest, sharpest part. Separate appearances create separate loyalties. Two brothers begin to look like two separate brands, not one lineage. The public absorbs the split without being told to. The press narrates two storylines. Supporters pick teams. And the palace, whose only true goal is control, finds that separation stabilizes optics in the short term, even as it destroys the possibility of genuine healing. The protocol is meant to protect the crown, not heal the family. And that truth is what makes it so cold. Then comes the cliffhanger. Rumor says one brother was quietly denied access to a key event. Not uninvited. Not banned. Simply informed that attendance would be inappropriate, unadvisable, logistically difficult. A door closed with polite language and no fingerprints. And once that happens, the message becomes unmistakable. The palace is willing to use separation as punishment, not just prevention. But separation only works if both sides comply, and one of them, in this story, refuses to be managed. In this dramatized arc, William doesn't just inherit a future, he inherits a mess. The Queen's demand forces him into a brutal role: peacemaker on the surface, enforcer underneath. Because ending a public feud isn't a hug, it's negotiation, boundaries, and sacrifice. This section explores William's alleged dilemma: protect the institution at all costs, or protect his brother at personal risk, knowing either choice could stain his reign before it begins. William is framed as crisis manager, not just heir. He is expected to carry stability like armor, and to project calm even when the family is tearing itself open behind him. Pride and pain become weapons in this environment. because responsibility can be used to demand obedience from everyone else. Advisors allegedly pressure him to appear decisive and unshaken, to look like the future is already disciplined under his touch. And that pressure shapes his choices in ways the public never sees. If he looks soft, the palace fears the feud becomes precedent proof that dissent can be loud and survive. If Harry wins in public perception, future dissent grows. That's the institutional fear, sitting behind every personal conversation. So William begins to consider a cold truth stability may require distance, not healing. Not because he wants distance as a brother, but because the institution rewards distance as a strategy. The emotional stakes are suffocating loyalty to family versus loyalty to role. If he chooses the role, he risks becoming the villain in his brother's story. If he chooses the brother, he risks becoming the weak point in the institution's chain of command. And in this dramatized timeline, the palace doesn't tolerate weak points. It isolates them. That's why the cliffhanger lands so hard. William allegedly sets conditions that sound like an ultimatum of his own. Not a plea for peace, but terms, boundaries that must be accepted. A framework that turns reconciliation into agreement. In a family, that would be tragic. In a monarchy, it becomes policy. And once policy enters the relationship stops being private. And once conditions are set, we have to ask how Harry responds, because compliance would mean surrendering his story. In this fictional version of events, Harry doesn't hear the Queen's demand as peace. He hears it as erasure. Because end the feud can mean stop talking. And if the palace's real goal is to control his narrative, then separation becomes a muzzle. In this section, we explore Harry's alleged response, how he weighs apology versus autonomy, family versus truth, and why the most dangerous thing he can do isn't speak louder, it's speak smarter. Because Harry's inner conflict isn't simple anger, it's grief welded to resolve. Grief for what the brotherhood was supposed to be. Grief for the version of family that could have existed if the institution didn't treat emotions like threats. And underneath that grief, a sharp suspicion reconciliation is a trap with conditions. Not let's heal, but agree to a version of events. Not let's talk, but stop talking. In this dramatized arc, Harry looks at the ultimatum and sees the subtext: if you want access, you must accept silence. If you want closeness, you must surrender control over your own story. So he pauses publicly. Strategic silence, not because he's broken, but because he's calculating. He understands that reacting loudly feeds the palace's favorite narrative: unstable, impulsive, difficult. The palace wants him emotional. He becomes precise. He weighs apology versus autonomy and realizes the price of apology might be self-erasure. He weighs family versus truth and realizes truth, once surrendered, is never returned. That is where the most dangerous form of resistance begins, not by shouting, but by refusing to be reframed. And leverage becomes the quiet heartbeat of his strategy. Not threats delivered theatrically, but the private reality that he may hold documents, timelines, confidants, receipts, pieces of context that could make the palace's narrative collapse if they ever surfaced in the wrong way. That's why the palace fears him, not because he can talk, but because he can talk with weight. In this fictional account, Harry doesn't need to publish everything. He only needs the institution to believe he could. That belief changes how people behave around him. It makes courtiers nervous. It makes advisors cautious. It makes every friendly outreach feel like a calculation. A public pivot begins to form. Controlled statements. Indirect messaging. The kind of communication that doesn't violate the palace's rules directly, but still reaches the public. He learns to use timing, silence, and selective appearance like language. And the emotional cost is brutal, losing a brother to save a self. Because the palace's separation protocol doesn't just block meetings, it hardens identities. William becomes the institution. Harry becomes the risk. And once those identities solidify, brotherhood becomes a negotiation, not a bond. Then comes the cliffhanger. A message arrives that feels like a threat disguised as advice. The kind of warning delivered in soft words, with a calm tone that makes it more chilling. Be careful. Think about consequences. Don't make this worse. In a palace, that isn't guidance, it's pressure. It's the institution reminding him it still has tools, still has access points, still has ways to punish without fingerprints. And the moment Harry feels that pressure, he understands the truth beneath the ultimatum. They aren't asking him to end a feud. They're asking him to stop being a problem. And when threats enter the bloodstream of a palace, the next step is always the same: factions pick sides, and the machine starts moving. Palaces don't move as one. They move as factions, quiet alliances built on fear, ambition, and the promise of a cleaner future. In this dramatized account, the Queen's demand triggers a scramble. Traditionalists want order, strategists want optics, reformers want a reset, and opportunists want advantage. If separation is on the table, then someone believes this feud is useful, and someone else believes it must be buried before it burns them. Traditionalists see visible conflict as sacrilege. They want the feud ended not for healing, but for discipline. Strategists see the brothers as competing brands and want the outcome that stabilizes the monarchy's image fastest. Reformers see the feud as proof that the old model of silence is failing and want a reset that looks modern, controlled, and firm. Opportunists see what opportunists always see: a crisis is a ladder. They want advantage, proximity, relevance, influence over the next reign. And in this chaos, courtiers do what they do best: weather forecast. They align early with the power they believe will last, because palace survival is not about loyalty, it's about prediction. Sabotage risk spikes, leaks appear, stories are planted, sympathy becomes selective. One camp frames Harry as reckless, another frames him as wounded, another frames him as dangerous. One camp frames William as dutiful, another frames him as cold, another frames him as trapped. The public thinks its opinion. The palace knows its positioning. Because whoever controls the narrative controls who looks legitimate when the dust settles. And then the scapegoat problem emerges. Someone will be blamed to protect the throne. Sometimes the scapegoat is a staff member. Sometimes it's a miscommunication. Sometimes it's a single advisor quietly removed. The palace prefers sacrifices that don't threaten the symbol. Family bonds become liabilities, managed like risks. And once bonds are treated as risks, the institution begins to behave like an insurer, minimizing exposure, reducing contact, isolating the highest volatility. The cliffhanger lands with a chill. One key power player flips, turning end the feud into end him. In this dramatized reality, that doesn't mean violence. It means ending his influence, ending his credibility, ending his access, ending his ability to be heard. Turning reconciliation into containment, turning peace into silencing. And when that flip happens, the story becomes public, because the palace can't control what it can't keep private. The moment the Queen's demand leaks, it stops being family discipline and becomes a national spectacle. Whispers become headlines. Headlines become sides. And the royal silence becomes gasoline. In this section, we dramatize the leak wave, anonymous sources, strategic clarifications, and a public forced to decide whether the Queen acted as a protector or as an enforcer. Because once the world senses separation is deliberate, it starts asking who benefits from a broken brotherhood. It begins with coordinated leaking. Because in a palace crisis, the first battle is always over framing. Competing camps move fast, each trying to seed the version of events that makes them look righteous. One side whispers that the Queen acted out of duty, that she's the last wall between the crown and chaos. Another side frames it as coercion, an institution demanding performance and calling it peace. The clarifications arrive like gentle corrections, but they're not corrections. They're steering. A word choice here, a timeline there, an unnamed source close to the matter insisting the demand was misunderstood. And yet the more it's clarified, the clearer it becomes that something serious is being managed behind the scenes. Polarization hits instantly. Unity defenders argue the brothers must stop embarrassing the institution, that the crown can't function as a public stage for personal pain. Let them be. Human critics push back, calling the demand a cold power move disguised as family healing. The media dynamics turn the story into a machine. Outrage cycles feeding engagement, sympathy cycles feeding loyalty, each new rumor generating new certainty. Every headline becomes a verdict, every panel discussion becomes a trial, and the royal silence becomes the loudest sound of all, because in the public mind, silence isn't neutrality, it's confirmation wearing gloves. Inside the palace, pressure rises like a storm under a ceiling. Staff are forced into loyalty tests without being told they're tests. Who is allowed to speak? Who is instructed to hold the line? Who is quietly removed from the flow of information because they're seen as sympathetic to the wrong side? Every non-denial becomes evidence in the press, and every internal tightening becomes proof to insiders that the situation is worse than anyone is admitting. The palace tries containment without admitting coercion, and that's where panic blooms, because you can't contain a narrative you refuse to name. Then comes the cliffhanger that transforms a sensational story into a dangerous one. A name surfaces as the architect of the separation protocol. Not the Queen as a symbol, but a specific strategist, court power broker, or advisor who built the machinery and argued that distance was the only solution. Once that name enters the public bloodstream, the story changes. It's no longer the family, it's not even the palace. It's a person with fingerprints, a hand behind the curtain. And once the public imagines a hand, it starts demanding accountability. And once names enter the arena, the monarchy isn't dealing with gossip anymore, it's dealing with betrayal with fingerprints. In this fictional finale, the Queen's demand forces a terrifying truth into daylight: the crown will trade comfort for control every time. The brothers face a choice with no clean outcome: perform unity, accept separation, or ignite a confrontation that could damage the institution forever. We connect every thread: the ultimatum, the protocol, the factions, the leaks, and we ask the darkest question of all: does forcing peace preserve the monarchy, or prove it no longer knows how to be a family? Because the win conditions are cold. Whose image improves if unity is performed? The institutions. Whose power consolidates if the feud becomes managed, scheduled, contained? The gatekeepers who survive by controlling optics. But the tragedy is personal brotherhood sacrificed for institutional stability, genuine healing replaced by choreography. Peace becomes a bargaining chip: end it quietly, and we'll manage the fallout, an offer that sounds merciful, until you realize it's a trade: your truth in exchange for access, your pain in exchange for silence. And once that trade is normalized, the precedent becomes terrifying. If they can separate heirs, they can separate anyone. If they can rearrange the brothers' world with calendars and protocol, then family bonds aren't bonds at all, they're permissions that can be rewritten. That's the haunting implication the palace tries to hide, but cannot. Unity is curated, not natural. It's produced the way a show is produced. And when the show requires separation to look stable, separation becomes policy. So the final cliffhanger question isn't just who wins today. It's who becomes the next risk the palace isolates when the next crisis hits. Because once an institution discovers that peace can be used as a weapon demanded under threat, enforced through distance, it becomes easier to reach for that weapon again. And that's why this story isn't really about two brothers. It's about power choosing control over relationship every single time, and calling it tradition. Because the real shock isn't that a queen demanded an end, it's what that demand reveals about how far the palace will go to control the story. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.